The grand atrium of the celestial spire was a storm of light and sound. Students from 100 worlds moved through the vast space, their forms a dazzling array of biology and technology. A tall, crystalline being from Procyon V glimmered as it communicated via light patterns. A group of stout, rock-skinned Groth examined the structural integrity of the floating platforms with low, rumbling approval. The air hummed with translated chatter, the smell of ozone, and the faint, sweet scent of alien botanicals. Park Ji-hwan stood near the main entrance, his back straight. His new Academy envirosuit, sleek and black with red Martian accents, felt good. It marked him as a top admit from the Sol System's premier military academy. He was here to prove humanity was more than just a clever, young species. He was here to excel. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for the other human admit listed on his orientation sheet. He expected someone impressive, perhaps from the European Alliance's Zero-G Engineering Corps or the Pan-Pacific Science Guild. His eyes passed over a young woman 3 times before they snapped back. She was human. She stood by a simple planter containing a fern-like plant from Earth, her fingers lightly brushing a frond. Her suit was the most basic model issued by the Academy, a dull gray without any markings. Her black hair was tied in a simple, practical manner. She held a standard-issue data slate and appeared to be reading the campus map. She looked utterly, completely ordinary. "You are Lee Soo-jin?" Ji-hwan asked, walking over. He kept his voice polite but neutral. She looked up. Her face was pleasant but unmemorable, her expression calm. "Yes, and you are Park Ji-hwan. The file said there would be 2 of us." "It did," he said, glancing around. A Volpani student nearby demonstrated minor telekinesis, floating 3 data crystals in a complex orbit. Ji-hwan felt a flush of second-hand embarrassment. "Did you just arrive from the transport hub?" "I did. The directional signage is very logical. The air recycling systems are also quite efficient. I could hear the filter cycles on the walk here." Her voice was soft, matter-of-fact. Ji-hwan blinked. "Who listened to air filters? Right? Well, we should proceed to the orientation assembly. It's best not to be late on the first day." He began walking and she fell into step beside him, neither too close nor too far. They moved through the crowd. Everywhere, students showcased their talents. A musical species from Lyra filled a corner with harmonious, 3-toned singing that made the light panels pulse. Kim Tae-shik, a human Ji-hwan recognized from the Martian engineering preliminaries, was already in a heated discussion with a Groth about plasma conduit efficiencies. His hands drawing shapes in the air. Ji-hwan walked a little faster, hoping to blend in. Soo-jin, however, seemed in no hurry. She observed a maintenance drone repairing a crack in a wall panel, her head tilting as she watched its welder activate. She noted something on her slate. "The initial welcome packet," Ji-hwan said, trying to steer her attention to something relevant, "outlines the first semester challenges. I'm aiming for the advanced astronavigation track." "What is your specialization?" Soo-jin considered the question. "The curriculum requires a primary focus. I selected General Systems Analysis." Ji-hwan almost tripped over his own feet. General Systems Analysis was the polite term for a catch-all track for students without a clear, elite specialty. It was for those who would become low-level administrators or, at best, junior technicians on outpost worlds. It was a track for the unremarkable. "I see," he said, his voice flat. The last bit of hope that she was a hidden genius faded. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A simple, average student from a minor Earth colony, likely here due to a quota for human representation. They entered the main assembly hall, a vast amphitheater with a ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the nebula outside. He found 2 seats near the back, where the impressive Choi Yuna was already sitting, her sharp eyes cataloging every species in the room. Yuna gave Ji-hwan a curt nod, then glanced at Soo-jin. Her eyebrow rose slightly, a silent question. "This is Lee Soo-jin," Ji-hwan said quietly. "Choi Yuna, xenobiology, specializing in adaptive symbiotic organisms," Yuna said, her tone professional. "A vital field," Soo-jin replied. "I read about your published paper on fungal network communication. Your proposal to use them as early warning systems for soil toxicity on colony worlds was very practical. Yuna was momentarily taken aback. You read that? It was in a very niche journal. The Academy Library archives are extensive, Sujin said simply, as if it were obvious to read the work of your future classmates before arrival. The headmistress, a being of light and graceful avian form named Alara, took the central stage. Her voice, translated directly into their minds, began the welcoming address. She spoke of potential, of galactic unity, of pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Ji-hwan listened, his heart swelling with ambition. He would make his mark here. He would show them what humanity could do. Next to him, Sujin also listened, but her eyes were not on the headmistress. They were tracing the path of a service drone along the ceiling rail, watching how it navigated around a flickering light panel. Her fingers tapped quietly on her slate, not taking notes on the speech, but seemingly drawing a small diagram. When the assembly ended, the students spilled back into the atrium, energy buzzing. Cliques were already forming based on species and specialty. Ji-hwan saw Tae-shik heading off with the Groth engineers. I am going to the navigation simulators to preview the coursework, Ji-hwan said to Sujin. Do you know where your dormitory sector is? Yes, she said, holding up her slate with the map. It is in the lower tertiary spire, near the botanical archives. It seems like a quiet area. She gave a small, polite bow of her head. It was good to meet you, Park Ji-hwan. Good luck with your preview. She turned and walked away, merging seamlessly into the flow of students, not towards the impressive high-tech labs or simulators, but towards a transit tube heading down and outward, to the quieter, less glamorous parts of the station. Ji-hwan watched her go for a second, then shook his head. He felt a pang of something. Not dislike, but a dull disappointment. Humanity's other representative would not be a rival or an ally of note. She was just a girl who listened to air filters and read niche journals, destined for a quiet, unimportant track. He turned and walked with purpose towards the simulators, towards the future he intended to claim. The mystery of Lee Sujin, if there even was one, was the last thing on his mind. The first week at the Celestial Spire was a blur of intense classes and social navigation. Park Ji-hwan threw himself into his studies, often working until the artificial night cycle. He saw Lee Sujin only in passing, usually in the central refectory or moving through the less busy corridors. She was always alone, always observing. Her simple gray suit a quiet smudge against the brilliance of the academy. The rumor among the small human cohort was set. Kim Tae-shik, after a single shared introductory engineering lecture, had dismissed her. She asked about the mineral composition of the lecture hall walls. He told Ji-hwan and Choi Yuna over a meal. Not the fusion core, not the ion drives. The walls. Who cares? Ji-hwan had nodded in agreement. It was strange. The first major campus-wide emergency drill was announced for a rest day. It was treated by many as a nuisance, an interruption to precious study time. The alert sounded at midday with a sharp, piercing tone. A calm, artificial voice filled every chamber. Gravity plate integrity failure simulated in sectors 2 through 7. All students initiate emergency protocols. This is a drill. Ji-hwan was in a study lounge in Sector 3 with Yuna and Jin Seowa, a nervous but incredibly gifted astronavigator. The moment the alert sounded, the room's gravity shifted. It didn't fail completely, but it became unreliable, fluctuating between a heavy pull and a sickening lurch towards weightlessness. Data tablets and drinking bulbs floated off tables. Across the spire, the designed chaos of the drill unfolded. The Vulpani students, their telekinetic senses finely tuned, were immediately overwhelmed by the erratic gravitational signals. They clutched their heads, disoriented and unable to focus. The Groth, strong and sturdy in normal gravity, flailed awkwardly as their weight changed, unable to get proper footing. Alarms blared, and warning lights strobed. Stay close to the wall, Ji-hwan yelled, grabbing a handhold beside a window. His training kicked in, but it was basic. He knew to secure himself, but not how to fix the problem. Yuna had wrapped her arms around a fixed chair leg, her face pale. Jin Seowa was the worst. Her mind, which could calculate a jump through a star cluster, was paralyzed by the unpredictable physical chaos. She floated a few feet off the floor, spinning slowly, hyperventilating.
Siwa,
"Grab something," Yuna shouted. "I can't. The vectors are all wrong," Siwa cried, her eyes wide with panic. Ji-hwan was about to try and lunge for her when he saw a flash of gray. Lee Soo-jin entered the lounge from the corridor. She moved differently than everyone else. She didn't fight the gravity shifts. She used them. As the pull lessened, she pushed off the doorframe with a gentle precision. As it increased, she dropped and rolled, coming up beside a wall panel that was spitting sparks. She didn't look panicked. She looked focused. She popped open a basic service hatch next to the panel that Ji-hwan had never even noticed. From within, she pulled out a manual cutoff switch, a heavy, old-fashioned lever. She jammed it down. The sparking from the wall panel stopped. Then she looked at Siwa. "Jin Siwa," she said, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the alarm. "You are floating at approximately 10 centimeters per second towards the eastern wall. On the count of 3, the gravity will pulse downward. It will be brief. When it does, bend your knees. The floor will meet you. Ready? 1, 2, 3. As if commanded by her, the gravity surged. Siwa dropped, her knees bending as instructed. She hit the floor with a thud but was standing, no longer adrift. She stared at Soo-jin, stunned. Soo-jin was already moving again. A conduit on the ceiling had buckled, spraying a fine mist of coolant. She kicked a floating table towards Yuna. "Choi Yuna, use this to shield the electrical relay behind you. The coolant is conductive." Yuna, without thinking, grabbed the table and shoved it against the wall. Soo-jin then unclipped her own academy belt. In a normal gravity pulse, she swung it, lassoing a floating service drone that was bumping mindlessly against the ceiling. She pulled it down, her fingers flying over its simple interface. She input a command. The drone's small warning light began flashing a steady amber. She released it, and it floated to the center of the room, emitting a loud, regular ping. "That is a location beacon for the repair teams," she said, raising her voice slightly. "If anyone is injured, gather near it. The systems will stabilize in 87 seconds." She was right. The gravity fluctuations began to smooth, then returned to normal. The alarm silenced, replaced by the calm voice. "Drill complete. All systems nominal. Please proceed to your scheduled activities." The lounge was a mess. Students were untangling themselves, looking embarrassed or relieved. Ji-hwan let go of his handhold, his heart pounding. He watched as Soo-jin walked over to the service hatch and reset the lever, closing the panel neatly. Jin Siwa approached her first. "How did you know about the gravity pulse?" "I've been mapping the drill patterns all week," Soo-jin said, as if this were a normal hobby. "They run brief, low-level tests every night. The system has a rhythm." She looked at the coolant mist now settling on the floor. "And this lounge uses a Mark 7 coolant. It's corrosive to the relay casing behind that wall." It was a logical step. Choi Yuna was looking at Soo-jin with new, analytical eyes. Not with friendship, but with deep curiosity. "You didn't use any special tools. You used a belt and a table. Available resources," Soo-jin said with a small shrug. She gave them all a brief nod. "The repair teams will be here soon to check the simulated damage." Then she left, just as quietly as she had arrived. Ji-hwan stood in the middle of the room. He had followed protocol. Secure yourself, wait for rescue. Soo-jin hadn't waited. She had understood the environment, predicted the system, and acted. She had even comforted a panicked student with specific, technical instructions that worked. "It was just a drill," Kim Tae-shik said, walking in from another room. He looked flustered. "They design it to fluster us. It doesn't mean anything." But Ji-hwan wasn't so sure. He looked at the closed service panel, so ordinary he would never have seen it. For the first time, the mystery of Lee Soo-jin pushed its way to the front of his mind. It wasn't a dramatic mystery. It was a quiet, persistent one. Who was she, really, to listen to the Academy's heartbeat when everyone else was only listening to its speeches. The academic rhythm of the spire settled into a demanding pace. Park Ji-hwan spent most of his time in the navigation simulators, his scores steadily climbing. Kim Tae-shik was almost always in the advanced engineering bays, arguing theory with the Groth. Choi Yuna buried herself in the xenobiology labs. Lee Soo-jin, however, seemed to exist in the spaces between. Ji-hwan would see her in the vast academy gardens, not admiring the exotic blooms, but examining the soil around the roots. He saw her once in the main library, not at the hollow terminals, but in the physical archives section, scrolling through centuries-old maintenance logs on a dusty reader. The mystery of her drill performance faded for most, filed away as a fluke, a moment of odd clarity. Tae-shik called it low system intuition, useful for fixing a broken door but not for shaping the future. Ji-hwan found himself curious despite his better judgment. His path crossed hers again in a most unlikely place. The weekly colloquium on unsolved anomalies in deep space phenomena. It was a famous, difficult lecture series open to all students, but usually attended only by the most confident astrophysics and cosmology track students. Ji-hwan went to challenge himself. He was surprised to see Soo-jin slip into a seat in the back row just as the lights dimmed. The lecturer was not a physical being, but a pre-recorded hologram of Professor Kalin, a legendary, long-dead astrophysicist. His spectral form flickered gently at the front of the hall. He presented not with live instruction, but with curated puzzles from his ancient research. The main display lit up with a complex, shifting pattern of energy readings. This, the hologram's serene voice intoned, is sensor log Theta 7, recovered from a probe that drifted for millennia in the silent space between galactic arms. It depicts a burst of unknown energy. Its pattern does not match any known cosmic event, stellar decay, or weapon signature. For 8 centuries, this log has defied categorization. Your task, as ever, is not to solve it, but to engage with its impossibility, to let it stretch the boundaries of your perception. A wave of quiet excitement went through the elite students. This was why they came to the spire, to touch the untouchable. Hands went up. A Vulpani student proposed a model of folded quantum space. A Groth suggested it was the echo of a primordial black hole's evaporation. Kim Tae-shik, from a few rows ahead of Ji-hwan, offered a theory about an unstable plasma filament, his voice eager. The hologram nodded to each, acknowledging their creativity without endorsement. All compelling frameworks built from known physics, it said. And yet, the anomaly's core randomness resists them. Ji-hwan stared at the flickering pattern on the screen. It was beautiful and strange. He tried to see a navigation solution in it, a course to plot, but it was just noise. He glanced back at Soo-jin. She was not looking at the professor or the arguing students. She was staring intently at the anomaly's visual representation, her head tilted. Her fingers moved slightly on her lap, as if tracing a shape only she could see. She did not look awed or confused. She looked recognizing, like someone spotting a familiar face in a distant crowd. The lecture ended without conclusion, as they always did. The students filed out, buzzing with theoretical talk. Ji-hwan hung back, watching Soo-jin approach the front. She didn't address the hologram, which was already fading. Instead, she stood before the main display, which now showed a frozen loop of the anomaly. She studied it for a full minute in silence before turning to leave. Later that day, Ji-hwan and Tae-shik were in a common area reviewing simulation data. Choi Yuna joined them, a botanical sample case in her hand. The conversation turned to the lecture. A waste of time, Tae-shik said, though his eyes were bright. A pretty picture with no answer. Theoretical dead ends are not useful. Stretching perception has value, Yuna countered. It reminds us how much we don't know. Ji-hwan, thinking of the look on Soo-jin's face, spoke without planning to. Lee Soo-jin was there, in the back.
Tae-shik snorted.
What could she possibly contribute to a conversation about quantum anomalies? As if summoned by the question, Soo-jin walked past their table on her way to the gardens. She carried a small, old-fashioned toolkit. Lee Soo-jin, Ji-Huan called out, surprising himself. She stopped and turned, her expression politely questioning. The anomaly today. Did you have any thoughts on it? Taeshik rolled his eyes but said nothing. Yuna watched. Curious. Sujin hesitated for a second, as if deciding whether to speak. It is not an energy signature, she said finally, her voice quiet. Of course it is, Taeshik said. The sensor log picked up energy. It is reading as energy, Sujin corrected gently. But the pattern is not of creation or emission. It is a pattern of decay, of failure. She stepped closer. With her finger, she drew a rough shape in the condensation on their table. It was a simplified version of one small section of the anomaly's waveform. See this repeating dip here? The sharp fall, then the uneven recovery? That is not a natural stellar rhythm. That is a mechanical stutter. That's absurd. Taeshik laughed. A mechanical stutter from what? Some ancient machine? It's deep space. Sujin nodded. Yes, but the pattern, it reminds me of the failure logs from 22nd century Earth fusion reactor dampeners. Before magnetic containment was perfected, they would fail in a cascade. The sensors would pick up the resonance as an energy ghost that looked random. But it was just the sound of pieces breaking in a specific order. The table was silent. Taeshik's smile was gone, replaced by a frown of disbelief. You are comparing an 800-year-old deep space mystery to antique reactor parts? It is a similar pattern of systemic collapse, Sujin said, as if it were the most logical connection in the world. Not a quantum mystery, a maintenance report. She seemed to realize how her words sounded to them. She gave a small, almost apologetic bow of her head. It is just an observation. Please excuse me. She walked away, leaving the three of them staring at the fading water mark on the table. Taeshik was the first to speak, wiping the mark away with his sleeve. See? Low system intuition. She looks at the universe's greatest mysteries and sees a broken pump. Ji-Huan didn't answer. He was seeing the anomaly in his mind again, but now he was imagining it not as a flash of cosmic light, but as a shudder, a vibration, a thing coming apart. Felt wrong. It felt disrespectful to the mystery. But it also, in a way he could not explain, felt possible, unnoticed by any of them. The light panel in the ceiling above their table flickered once. In that flicker, for a fraction of a second, the face of Professor Kalen's hologram appeared, looking not at them, but in the direction Sujin had gone. Then it was gone, and the light was just a light again. Lee Sujin's comment about the anomaly was quickly forgotten by everyone except Choi Yuna. The others dismissed it as a quirky, irrelevant thought. But Yuna was trained to observe connections others missed. The way Sujin had identified the corrosive coolant, the way she had mapped the gravity drill rhythms. It spoke of a mind that saw foundations, not just surfaces. Yuna decided to find her. It wasn't hard. While other students flocked to the gleaming labs and social hubs, Sujin frequented the older, quieter parts of the spire. Yuna finally located her in the secondary arboretum, a vast, humid dome filled with less glamorous, utilitarian plant life from colony worlds. Sujin was not simply walking through it. She was kneeling in the loamy soil beside a bed of struggling, gray-leafed shrubs from a mining world called Kessel 7. A small, broken horticultural drone lay on the path beside her. Its casing was open, and Sujin was carefully cleaning its pollen-dispensing mechanism with a tiny brush from her toolkit. They usually just send those back to the maintenance bay for recycling, Yuna said, announcing her presence. Sujin looked up, her face calm. The wait for repair is 17 cycles. In that time, this plot would not be pollinated. The Kessel 7 shrubs would die. And that matters? Yuna asked, kneeling beside her. They're not exactly beautiful. They are efficient, Sujin said, returning to her work. Their root structure binds toxic heavy metals. They were brought here to study for soil reclamation on poison worlds. My home colony has similar problems. Letting them die would be a waste of data. She spoke of data not as numbers on a screen, but as a living, growing thing. Yuna watched her skilled, careful hands. You fix things. I try to understand why they break. Then fixing is often simple. Sujin slotted a cleaned component back into place with a soft click. Is that what you were doing with the deep space anomaly? Trying to fix it. Yuna's tone was not mocking, but genuinely curious. Sujin paused.
No.
That is far beyond fixing. But understanding its pattern might be useful. If it is a signal of failure, not creation, then it tells us something about what is, or was out there. A broken machine is a record of its own function. This was a new idea to Yuna. Everyone at the spire looked for active signals, for messages, for power sources. Looking for the echo of a breakdown was a fundamentally different approach. You spend a lot of time in the old sections, Yuna noted. The archives, the lower engineering bays. Here, the important things are often underneath, Sujin said simply. She finished with the drone and sealed its casing. With a tap on a simple control pad, the little machine whirred to life, lifted unsteadily, then righted itself. It beeped once at Sujin and floated back to its work over the shrub bed. Sujin stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. She then walked to a different part of the garden, where earth wheat grew beside a creeping, blue algae from a dead ocean world. Yuna followed. What are you doing now? Yuna asked. An experiment, Sujin said. She took a small vial from her pocket and carefully used a dropper to transfer pollen from the wheat to the sticky surface of the blue algae. This algae is not for study. It is a remnant. It survived a planetary biosphere collapse. It is very tough. The wheat is adaptable, but fragile. You're cross-pollinating them? Yuna was astonished. This was advanced, almost reckless xenobotany. Not directly. That would not work. I am using the wheat pollen as a carrier for the algae's resilience proteins, a kind of biological primer. She spoke as if this were a standard kitchen recipe. If I can coax even a few of the wheat seeds to express a fraction of that toughness, they might grow in poorer soil, on colonies with bad earth. Yuna stared at her. This was not the work of a simple general systems student. This was the quiet, practical work of a survivor. It was science not for glory, but for continuity. Why are you really here, Sujin? The question came out softly. Sujin looked at her, and for a moment, the polite, blank mask seemed to thin. Yuna saw a deep, weary knowledge in her eyes, the kind that came from seeing systems fail. To learn, Sujin said, the mask settling back into place. Same as you, but you learn different things. You learn the spire's bones, its old scars, its forgotten projects. Someone should, Sujin said. She looked around the arboretum, at the mix of the glorious and the forgotten. You are all taught to build towers taller and shinier. I am interested in what makes the ground stable enough to hold them. A gruff voice interrupted them. You, human. It was Bortok, the Tauran chief of maintenance, a massive being with coarse fur and hands like industrial tools. He was stomping down the path. Most students shied away from him. Sujin turned. Chief Bortok. The filter seals on the level 5 oxygen processors. The ones you suggested. They worked. The vibration is gone. He sounded almost annoyed to admit it. Where did you learn about pre-war Tauran polymer blends? The archive has the original station construction manuals. Volume 47, subsection 9. Sujin replied without hesitation. The modern seals are better in a vacuum, but they resonate at the frequency of the level 5 pumps. The old blend is less efficient, but it dampens the sound. It is a better fit for that specific junction. Bortok grunted, a sound of deep approval. He tossed her a small, worn metal token. Show that at any service bay. Gets you better tools. He glared at Yuna, then stomped away. Sujin looked at the token in her hand. A small, real smile touching her lips. It seemed to mean more to her than any academic award might. Yuna understood then. Lee Sujin was not here to climb the spire's social or academic ladder. She was here to know it, from its roots in the soil to the oldest bolt in its frame. She was making friends not with the elite students, but with the custodial AI, the maintenance chief, the forgotten plants. She was building a network of understanding that existed entirely outside of fame or grades. It was a kind of power, Yuna realized. A quiet, resilient power. And for the first time, she wondered if, when the next real crisis came, all their specialized brilliance might be useless compared to someone who simply knew how the place was put together. The Grand Interspecies Debate Tournament was the Spire's biggest social and intellectual event of the semester. The central forum was packed. Floating platforms held students from every corner of the galaxy. The air shimmered with translation fields. Park Ji-hwan, Choi Yuna, and Kim Tae-shik sat together, watching a heated debate on quantum ethics. Lee Soo-jin was not with them. Ji-hwan had half expected her to skip it, probably to study some obsolete water reclamation system. He found he missed her quiet presence, a steady anchor in the storm of ego and ambition around him. On stage, a Vulpani debater was making a brilliant point, her telepathic emphasis making her words glow in the minds of the audience. It was at that exact moment that the lights died. Not just the stage lights. Every primary and secondary light in the vast forum snapped off, plunging the space into a blackness so total it felt solid. A second of stunned silence was broken by the sudden, sickening lurch of failing gravity. The familiar, alarming dip and sway from the drill, but now it was violent, uncontrolled. Shouts of alarm echoed. Then the emergency floor strips flickered on, casting a hellish red glow. The gravity stabilized at a nauseating 20% of normal, sending people and objects drifting. Just a systems failure, Tae-shik shouted over the rising panic, pulling himself to a handhold. Backup power will engage. But the backup did not come. Instead, a new horrible sound began. A deep, metallic groaning from the forum's perimeter. In the red light, they saw the massive containment fields that held the debate's visual exhibits flicker and die. These were not just holograms. They included volatile plasma sculptures, exotic matter samples in stasis, and a tank of iridescent, gaseous beings from a nebula. The containment fields, Yuna yelled. If they fail, a plasma sculpture near the ceiling sputtered, its containment gone. A globule of superheated matter dripped like molten rain, burning through a floating platform. Screams erupted. The gaseous beings in their tank swirled in distress, their forms starting to press against the now weakening glass. This was no drill. This was targeted, systematic sabotage. Chaos took over. The Vulpani, their minds assaulted by the tide of panic, were incapacitated. The Groth tried to move to secure the exhibits but flailed in the low gravity. The specialized elite were helpless, their knowledge too narrow for this cascading, multi-system collapse. Ji-hwan's training screamed at him to find a command node, to restore order, but every system was dead. He saw Headmistress Ilara's avian form, lit by the emergency glow, directing faculty, but their gestures were frantic. The systems were not responding to override commands. Where is she? The thought cut through Ji-hwan's panic. He scanned the red-lit chaos. He did not see Soo-jin's gray suit. Then he saw a flicker of movement where no one should be. High up on the western wall, near the dark hole of a massive air circulation duct, a service panel swung open. A figure emerged, backlit by the faint, steady glow of independent work lights from within the duct. It was Soo-jin. She did not look down at the chaos. She looked along the wall, her head moving as if following a map only she could see. Then she moved, fast and sure. In the low gravity, she pushed off from the duct edge, sailing across the open space to grab a structural girder. She pulled herself into the shadows. What is she doing? Tae-shik gasped, following Ji-hwan's pointing finger. They watched, helpless, as the crisis deepened. A conduit burst near the ceiling, spraying not coolant, but actual fire-suppressant foam, clouding the red-lit air. The sabotage was attacking life support, too. The air began to taste thin and stale. High above, Soo-jin worked. They saw flashes of her hands. She wasn't using a modern tool. She was turning a large manual wheel, the kind meant for emergency venting. With a grunt they could almost hear across the space, she shoved it open. A rush of air whistled from the forum, pulling the obscuring foam with it, clearing the view. The gaseous being's tank was now visibly cracking. Sujin saw it. She braced her feet on the girder, unclipped a device from her belt. It wasn't a weapon. It was the magnetic coil from a basic lab spectrometer, jury-rigged with wires. She aimed it not at the tank, but at a junction box on the far wall. She activated it. A visible wave of distortion, a crude electromagnetic pulse, shot out. It was a stupid, simple broadband burst. Every modern, networked system in the forum shorted out. But the old, manual override she had just opened, the one controlling the air, was unaffected. More importantly, the subtle signal that had been hijacking the containment fields and blocking the backups was disrupted. For 1 second, the system's automated failsafes found a gap in the sabotage. With a shuddering hum, the gravity returned to normal. People fell the last few inches to the floor. A moment later, the containment fields flickered back to life, restabilizing the plasma and the gas being's tank just as a crack webbed across its surface. The primary lights remained off, but the backup power finally surged online, bathing the forum in steady, white emergency light. The active sabotage was over. The crisis was contained at the sudden, shocking quiet, filled with coughs and whimpers. All eyes turned upwards. Lee Sujin was still perched on the girder. Her face was smudged with grime, her hair disheveled. She was reattaching the magnetic coil to her belt with calm, deliberate movements. She looked down at the scene below. The scared students, the damaged exhibits, the relieved faculty. There was no triumph on her face.
No prive.
Only a quiet assessment, as if checking off items on a list. She gave a small, satisfied nod. Then she turned, slipped back into the open service duct, and pulled the panel closed behind her. She disappeared into the spire's inner skeleton, leaving the stunned silence of the forum behind. Ji-hwan stood, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had seen brilliant navigation. He had seen powerful engineering. But he had never, in his life, seen anything like that. It wasn't mastery of a system. It was a conversation with the very walls. She hadn't used advanced tech. She had used the Academy's own forgotten anatomy against the attack. Kim Tae-shik was speechless, staring at the closed panel. Choi Yuna simply nodded slowly, as if a deep suspicion had been confirmed. The mystery of Lee Sujin was no longer a quiet question. It was a blazing, urgent demand for an answer. Who was she? The summons came the next morning. A silent, discreet message on Park Ji-hwan's data slate, Choi Yuna's comband, and Kim Tae-shik's engineering interface. The same message went to Jean Seoa. It gave a location deep in the faculty spire and a time. It was signed with the symbol of Headmistress Alara herself. They arrived together, a silent, nervous group. The room was not a grand office, but a simple, circular observation chamber. One wall was a clear panel looking out into the nebula. Headmistress Alara stood there, her feathered form silhouetted by the glowing gas clouds. In the center of the room stood Lee Sujin. She was back in her simple gray suit, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. She looked calm. There was another presence in the room. Flickering gently in the corner was the hologram of Professor Kalin, his ancient, kind face watching them. "Sit," Alara's voice said in their minds, gentle but leaving no room for refusal. For chairs formed from the floor. Saturday Ji-hwan's eyes were locked on Sujin, the girl from the colony, the one who listened to air filters, the one who had moved through the sabotage like a ghost in the machine. He couldn't reconcile the two. "The saboteur has been captured," Alara began. "A radical faction opposed to the Concord. They used knowledge of our most advanced systems. They failed because of knowledge they did not possess. Knowledge of our oldest ones." The hologram of Professor Kalin spoke, his voice like rustling pages. "The anomaly, the deep space log. You identified it as a pattern of decay. Ms. Lee, a mechanical failure. Can you tell your classmates why that was significant?" Sujin met their eyes one by one. There was no longer any point in hiding. "Because it told me the saboteurs thought like everyone else here," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They look for the newest, the shiniest, the most complex system to attack. They do not look at the foundations. They do not study the plumbing. She took a small step forward. My name is Lee Sujin. I am from the Gyeonggi Reclamation Zone on Earth. But I am not a student. A cold shock went through Ji-hwan. I am a Grade 3 Remedial Systems Analyst with the United Earth Corps of Engineers, she continued. The title sounded plain, bureaucratic. My training was not here. It was on Earth's scrap archipelagos, the floating cities built from the ruins of the climate collapse wars. My teachers were failing reactors, collapsing seawalls, and dead orbital habitats. The image was so different from the gleaming spire it was hard to grasp. Taeshik stared, his mouth slightly open. Earth's observation, Headmistress Alara said, was that the galactic Concord, for all its wonders, had a single point of failure: hyperspecialization. A brilliant mind that can fold quantum space may not know how to restart a failed air scrubber. The spire is the symbol of that. My assignment was to assess its structural and systemic vulnerabilities, to see if it could survive not a war, but a breakdown. You were a spy? Jean Seoa whispered. A scout, Sujin corrected softly. A scout for weakness. Not to exploit it, but to understand it. My report is complete. The sabotage only proved its conclusions. You are all experts at building towers. My people are experts at propping them up when they lean with whatever is nearby. Professor Kalen's hologram flickered. She saw my anomaly for what it was because her mind is not trained on the stars, but on the ground. She sees the fingerprint of collapse. It is a perspective we have lost. A perspective, it seems, we desperately need. Choi Yuna was the first to find her voice. The gardens, the pollination, the maintenance logs. You weren't just curious. You were auditing. Sujin nodded. Yes, a system's resilience is in its redundancies, its history, and its forgotten parts. You have amazing redundancies in your primary systems, but you have forgotten the old ones. The saboteur did not know about the manual vent shafts because they are not in the modern schematics. They are in volume 12 of the original construction logs, which no one reads. Ji-hwan finally spoke, his voice rough. All of it? The drill? The questions? Was it all just an act? For the first time, Sujin's comm mask showed a crack. She looked at him, and there was a hint of genuine regret. No, Park Ji-hwan. The curiosity was real. The desire to learn was real. I just learned different things than you did. She paused. And the help I offered Jean Seoa during the drill. That was just help. The room was silent, the weight of the truth pressing down. They had pitted her, dismissed her, been confused by her. All the while, she had been seeing the academy with X-ray eyes, understanding its bones and its breath better than its own architects. What happens now? Kim Taeshik asked, his pride clearly wounded. Now, Headmistress Alara said, Ms. Lee's mission is over. She will depart. Her report will recommend changes, including a new foundational course for all students. Applied systemic history and cross-disciplinary improvisation. The hologram of Professor Kalen smiled. I have already volunteered to help design the curriculum. It is time we all learned to listen to the air filters. Sujin gave a final, small bow to her classmates. You are the galaxy's best. You will build incredible things. Just remember to check the ground they stand on. She turned to leave. Wait, Ji-hwan said, standing. The anger and betrayal were there, but underneath was a dawning, humbling awe. That thing you did with the magnetic coil, what was that called? In your core. Sujin stopped at the door. She looked back, and for a fleeting second, he saw the tired, capable engineer from the scrap archipelagos. We don't have a fancy name for it, she said. We just call it a fix. Lee Sujin left the celestial spire as quietly as she had arrived. There was no ceremony, no official farewell. One moment she was in the headmistress's chamber. The next she was gone, her few belongings already packed. The official story was a family emergency requiring her return to Earth. Most of the student body accepted it without a second thought. The unremarkable human girl was gone. It was hardly noteworthy. For Park Ji-hwan, Choi Yuna, Kim Tae-shik, and Jin Seo-ah, the academy felt different. The air was the same, the classes continued, but the spire itself seemed to have changed. It was no longer just a collection of advanced labs and lecture halls. It was a living thing, with a skeleton of old conduits, a heartbeat of pumps and filters, and a history written in its forgotten panels. Ji-hwan found he could not focus on his navigation algorithms. His eyes kept drifting to the walls, wondering what was behind them. During a study session, Tae-shik slammed his hand on the table in frustration. It makes no sense. She was a mechanic, a glorified handyman. Why does it bother me? Yuna looked up from a plant sample. Because she saw things we didn't. She understood the context. We know how to make a star drive work. She would know why it stopped and how to make it hobble home on battery power. It's a different kind of knowledge. It's a necessary kind, Jin Seo-ah said softly. They all looked at her. She had been very quiet since the sabotage. During the drill, when I was panicking, she didn't tell me it would be okay. She gave me data, a vector, a time. She gave me a problem I could solve. That's what kept me calm. She didn't offer hope. She offered a function. A week after Soo-jin's departure, Headmistress Alara made an announcement. A new, mandatory foundational course was being added for all first-year students, starting next semester. Its title was long and awkward, PR 101, Foundational Systems Integration and Historical Continuity. The student body groaned. Another boring requirement. But Ji-hwan requested and received the course primer. It was not a list of theories. It was a series of practical problems. It asked questions like, if the main power fails, what 3 manual systems in your dormitory block can be used to signal for help? Identify the location of the oldest water reclamation pipe in your sector. What common academy snack food can be used to temporarily seal a minor atmospheric leak? The recommended reading list included the original construction logs of the Spire, AT. The bottom of the primer was a short, anonymous introduction. Ji-hwan knew who wrote it. You are here to learn to build. But everything that is built rests on something else. To build well, you must understand what you are building on. To build forever, you must learn how to repair. This course is not about the future you imagine. It is about the future that survives. Ji-hwan closed the file. He left his dorm and took a transit tube not to the simulators but down to the lower tertiary spire. He found the door to the old botanical archives. Inside, the air was humid and smelled of soil and life. He walked past the Kessel 7 shrubs. They were thriving, their gray leaves full. A small, repaired drone buzzed contentedly among them. He continued to the plot where earth wheat grew beside the stubborn blue algae. There, tied to a stake with a plain piece of twine, was a small data chip. It had not been there before. He picked it up. Back in his room, he slid it into his reader. Contained no message, no goodbye. It was a single, massive file. It was Lee Soo-jin's personal, unofficial map of the Spire. It was not of lecture halls. It was a meticulous catalog of service tunnels, manual overrides, emergency tool caches, structural stress points, and non-networked life support backups. It noted which plants in the arboretum were edible, which had medicinal sap, and which could be used for water filtration. It was a blueprint of survival. She had left it for them. For anyone who knew to look. Ji-hwan sat back in his chair. He thought of Earth not as the political entity that sent a spy, but as a world of survivors. People who had pulled civilization from the scrap. Their representative hadn't come to show off dazzling intellect. She had come to quietly test the foundations of everyone else's dazzling dreams. And she had found them brittle. Her fuck yeah moment wasn't a victory in battle. It was the quiet, undeniable fact that when everything engineered by geniuses failed, the simple, contextual, stubborn understanding of a human from the broken world had been the thing that worked. He opened a new document on his screen. He began to type, copying notes from Soo-jin's map. He started with the location of the manual gravity cutoff switch in his own sector's common lounge. Then he sent a message to Yuna, Tae-shik, and Seo-ah. Found something. Meet me in the gardens. There's something we need to learn. Outside the viewport, the nebula glittered, beautiful and uncaring. The spire floated within it, a tiny bubble of light and order. Park Ji-hwan finally understood that order was not a permanent state. It was a continuous process of repair, maintained by those who paid attention. He might still become a great navigator, but first he would learn the map of his own home. Not the one they gave him, but the one she had left behind. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't being the smartest or the strongest. It was being the ones who, when the lights went out, knew how to feel their way along the walls until they found the old manual switch that could bring them back on. And they would teach others to do the same.